Hi, my name is Alice, and welcome to my video for today, which is intensive and extensive properties in chemistry. So to set the stage, I just want to give a little bit of background about what they are. Intensive properties are properties that don't depend on the amount of substance that you have. So this may be a little bit confusing at first, but if you look at some of the examples, which include temperature, density, and the hardness of a rock or any other kind of metal or something like that, these are intensive properties. So regardless of if you have a tiny bit or a huge proportion of these whatever substance you're working with, these different properties don't change. Okay, now by contrast, we have extensive properties. Now, extensive properties are additive. They vary with the amount of substance that you have, and the additive part means that the amount that this property increases must be additive, which means that if you add one thing and another thing together, that the final extensive property of the end result is going to be just the sum of the two original substances. So good examples of these include length, or here, weight or mass, and energy of some sort. So you can see that if I have two samples of something and I put them together, all of these properties are just going to add on to each other. Okay, now when you get into actually categorizing different properties with each other, usually you can change something from an intensive to an extensive property or vice versa by dividing or multiplying by the substance that you have. So a couple really good examples are density and temperature. For density, you start out with the mass of a substance, and when you divide that by the amount of substance you have, in other words, volume, you get density. So mass and volume are both extensive properties, and density is the intensive property. So the two extensive properties put together in some ratio gives you the intensive property. Now, temperature works the same way. So temperature in itself is intensive, and then energy and the amount are both extensive. So when you put the two extensive properties together, you get the intensive property, which is temperature. So this is almost always the case, and this is how you can change the different types of categories of properties that you have. And then there are other things called composite properties, which are a combination of other kinds of properties. And the ratio of extensive properties is an intensive property. This is just like I showed on the last slide with density and temperature. Now here, composite properties are basically very, very similar to changing from intensive to extensive and vice versa. And again, we have the example of density, where if you divide mass and volume, which are extensive properties, you get the intensive property of density. So density does not depend on the amount of substance that you have. So the next category is specific properties. Now, specific properties are an extensive property divided by the mass. An extensive property divided by the mass. Now, you might say, well, an extensive property is extensive, and mass is also extensive, so specific properties are intensive, right? Exactly right. So these are a special kind of intensive property because, as we saw before, not every intensive property is something that you can get by dividing by mass, but specific properties are specifically divided by mass instead of some other property. Now, some good examples are volume. So volume in itself you can measure them in meters cubed or liters. And of course, there are other kinds of measurements, but these are some of the most common. And you get specific volume by dividing each of those by mass. So when we talk about SI units, we can use meters cubed divided by kilograms, or liters divided by kilograms. So that will, both of those measure specific volume. And then another example is entropy, which is an extensive property. So that's joules, energy, divided by Kelvin, which is temperature. Specific entropy is just those two divided by kilograms again. So you remember when you put those things together, you want to make sure your parentheses are in the right place. So down there I've written joules divided by Kelvin times kilograms. So make sure those units are correct. All right, so there are a few exceptions to these rules, and these basically happen when not all properties fit fairly or squarely into one or the other category. And this is one of the major criticisms of the categorization of intensive and extensive properties. So properties sometimes switch category depending on other situations. And the voltage of a capacitor, for example, when you have them in series and in parallel, the property is different because they don't always just add up to each other, right? If you have them in series or if you have them in parallel, the way that you get the total capacitance of a system is different. And properties can also vary by size. So this is another major way that you can get variance. And good examples are viscosity. So viscosity basically means the thickness or how well a liquid flows. And for microscopic systems, they can be completely different. And then color for quantum dots. So quantum dots are these like really tiny things that you use in chemistry. And when you get to really tiny sizes like that, colors can depend on size. So if you have a slightly bigger quantum dot, you have a certain color. And then when you get a smaller quantum dot, you have another color. So it's just a little bit weird where it doesn't exactly depend on the amount of substance, but it doesn't not depend on the amount of substance either. So it's just a little bit confusing and hard to categorize into extensive or intensive exactly. All right, so that's it. It's pretty simple for the most part. Properties do fall into the extensive and intensive categories. So I hope that was really helpful for you. If you are interested, I do offer all of my slides and some other bonus materials for free. I will put the link down below if you want to sign up for those. If you enjoyed my video, I hope you can check out some of those videos over there. Those are some that I have made as well. So thanks so much. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye!